If you own a car, you know that unrest in the Middle East has sent petrol prices rocketing to a 30-month high. What you probably don't know is that controversial moves are underway to lessen Australia's reliance on imported crude by converting coal into fuel. Proponents claim underground coal gasification, or UCG, is technically and environmentally sound. Yet critics argue it's just not worth the long-term risk to some of the country's most fertile farmland. By the end of the year, the Queensland Government will decide whether to give UCG the go-ahead.
This is not clean coal technology. This is toxic chemical production.
I think there's been a lot of hysteria.
The Queensland Government has shut down an experimental underground coal gasification project on the Darling Downs after dangerous chemicals were found in underground water supplies.
This company, in my view, has failed to act appropriately.
We will never get the answers and we'll never get compensated.
I think there's been a lot of unfair implication.
I don't care at what level that groundwater contamination is, there's contamination.
I'm absolutely furious because I actually believed in this technology.
If this technology cannot be operated safely, then it has no future.
When a groundwater contamination scare engulfed underground coal gasification company Cougar Energy in June last year, the fledgling UCG industry was dealt a serious blow. The Queensland State Government shut Cougar's pilot plant at Kingaroy, and while some worry, others hope the toxic publicity will stop this industry ever getting off the ground. At the time, only 2 other operators were authorised to pilot the technology, Carbon Energy and Link Energy. But farm lobby group AgForce was so alarmed it called for a moratorium on all 3.
These are not simple chemical compounds. These are highly carcinogenic. These are highly dangerous contaminants that once released into groundwater can just about end up anywhere.
2 months after Cougar, Carbon Energy's pilot near Dalby was suspended after an unauthorised discharge of processed water. For an industry struggling to distance itself from the equally controversial coal seam gas industry, and unease generally about the interface between mining and farming, the shutdowns were a PR disaster.
The net result of that was investor appetite for these sort of stocks, I think, diminished somewhat. We saw that in the share price response on some companies within the sector.
There's no doubt that in the case in Kingaroy, they made a mess of it. And they probably won't thank me for saying that, but it was either a mistake or a complete public relations disaster. One of the two, they made a mess of it, whichever one it is. And people have lost confidence in it.
We cannot afford to keep playing Russian roulette with these technologies, with these resources, across agricultural land that will produce food and fibre in perpetuity.
I think that the bad thing is the general public don't understand the difference between UCG and CSG, and they just see everyone as these evil coal burners that's going to poison their water.
UCG is repeatedly and wrongly compared to CSG or coal seam gas. While they both target coal seams too deep to be mined, they're very different processes. Coal seam gas miners pump out water, allowing previously trapped methane gas to flow to the surface, leaving the coal intact. With UCG, those coal seams are actually ignited.
So if the coal seam is 300 metres in the ground or 400 metres or 800 metres down, that's where it's happening. It happens right in the coal seam itself.
2 wells are drilled into the coal seam, initially parallel and then on an intersecting alignment. A heating source at the tip of the tube is introduced into the injection well and carefully directed to where the 2 wells intersect. As the coal is heated to 1200 degrees centigrade, a high-temperature chemical reaction occurs in the carbon-rich confined space environment, which converts solid coal into gas, simply known as gasification.
The Queensland Government appointed 3 scientists to investigate the 3 pilots. Those reports were handed in January. In February, the Queensland Government announced Carbon Energy would be allowed to restart its project with stricter conditions. But for Cougar, even though follow-up tests showed lower levels of contaminants, the news was bad.
They were given multiple opportunities to submit additional information before we came to our final conclusion that we didn't have confidence the project could be recommissioned. So we haven't come to this decision lightly, but the key issue is that the onus of proof has to be on a proponent to show they can operate without causing environmental harm, or they won't be allowed to proceed.
The Queensland Government's own performance, though, underwhelmed the authors of an independent scientific report into the 3 pilots. The 3 experts found a lack of initial regulatory oversight and called for improved groundwater and soil monitoring and better baseline data collection. The recommendation that Cougar Energy's burn chamber be decommissioned dismayed Cougar's boss, Dr. Len Walker.
The fact that no farmers' bores have recorded any contaminants at all, and the fact that we were shut down on the basis of a false reading which we gave to the department in good faith and subsequently confirmed was false. For all of those reasons, one can't help but feel it has been an extremely difficult path to present facts when there is so much emotion around the discussion.
It wasn't just the 3 companies piloting UCG that suffered. So too have a raft of other companies, like Perth-based Liberty Resources, which has tenements in Queensland covering 1.4 billion tonnes of coal.
The stock price halved straight away. There were people leave, and I think that's purely because they thought the industry as a whole was going to get shut down and that it didn't have any place here in Queensland. We really have to prove ourselves to government, and rightfully so. I mean, anything when there's a power generation industry, we need to show that not only are we beneficial in terms of jobs and revenue for Queensland, but also that we comply with all the environmental policies, and we're very confident that we can do that as an industry.
We don't do anything that could possibly hurt the water table or contaminate an aquifer in any way whatsoever. We manage everything in such a way that there is no environmental damage.
Peter Bond heads up the biggest and most advanced UCG company, Link Energy. Link's Chinchilla site is just a 30-minute flight from Brisbane in his private jet. This ambitious son of a truck driver and a teacher went from working in mines to buying them. And by the time he took a punt on a struggling company and unheard-of technology, he was a multi-millionaire.
I took over Link in 2004, end of 2004, and it was, I think it had 4 employees. It was basically bankrupt. It had no business plan. It was in a pretty bad state.
What made you want to buy it?
A very good question. I loved the concept of being able to unlock billions of tonnes of energy of stranded coal. I used to be a coal miner, and it just made sense that if we could unlock that value chain of coal and use UCG as a conduit to that gasification of unlocking billions of tonnes of coal, we can turn that into huge amounts of gas and into millions of barrels of diesel, and it just made a lot of sense.
Link's largest shareholder, Peter Bond, took the company public to raise money to build this $70 million pilot plant at Chinchilla on Queensland's Darling Downs. It's pretty impressive now, but 4 years ago it wasn't much.
It was a farmhouse and with a pipe sticking out of the ground and an ATCO shed. Now it's a full-blown industrial plant.
Yeah, boys.
His investment's yet to return $1, but he can afford to be patient. With a personal fortune estimated at $572 million, he recently made it into Australia's top 10 rich list. But frustratingly for him and the company's 15,000 shareholders, Cougar Energy's problems at Kingaroy came just as Link was readying to move from the pilot to the all-important commercialisation stage.
It certainly doesn't help. I mean, any black mark's a black mark. You don't want them. There's no doubt about that.
With this difficult background, Peter Bond figured the industry needed a good news story, and he was prepared to drive that story himself, literally.
We're taking the Link car and we're filling that with diesel, and we're starting our trip to Perth. So that's 5,500 kilometres, just to prove a point that you can take a lump of coal from under the ground, turn it into clean diesel and drive it across the country.
For Peter Bond, Link's diesel dash would be the culmination of a dream.
It's a very small Australian company that's turned into something bigger. It's one man's dream that's turned into something bigger. We've gone from what was maybe into a reality, and we're doing it. And it's all been done here in back at Chinchilla, and I think that's a great story. This is the ignition well, and basically underneath our feet is 1200 degree gasifier, so it's turning the ton of coal into gas.
How hard is it to keep that fire going?
The combustion process, it's actually quite hard to keep going because it's quite deep and it wants to keep putting itself out because it needs oxygen all the time to keep going.
When the gas reaches the surface, it's piped to the gas to liquids or GTL plant.
The ton of coal that we're standing on now, it's being gasified. By the time we walk 5 minutes to the GTL plant, it would have turned into a barrel of diesel.
And then it goes into a special process where it's converted to a synthetic crude or a syn crude, and then that syn crude can be further processed into many products: diesel fuel, jet fuel, all those different types of products you would normally get out of any oil refinery or petrochemical plant.
Link's Chinchilla site is a world first, the first time UCG and GTL have been paired up. Peter Bond hopes this site will one day host a commercial plant.
If you look at the pilot project out there, has it proved what you want it to prove?
The short answer is yes. When I first started Link, when I first took it public in 2006, my statement was I wanted to prove that we could take UCG gas and turn it into diesel. We've done that, and we can do that commercially, so the answer is yes.
Peter Bond hopes it will be the site of a commercial plant.
Our aim is to turn it to 20,000 barrels per day, which is about 8 million barrels a year. We can produce a barrel for around $30 a barrel, so we're very cost competitive.
One of the big issues with coal seam gas is the number of wells companies place on farmland they don't own. Once again, UCG is different.